with Derrick Ray. Derrick, boy, recruiting has really started to take off. And what would you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think you look at recruiting and everything that's been accomplished so far, and there's more to accomplish. And really the efforts of doing it together, right? It's not just one person. It can never just be one person. So when we're all on the same page, the communication is rolling the way you want it to go, and everyone's putting in the same amount of effort, pulling in the same direction, you have multiple people tied in, that's when you're really doing it effectively and efficiently in the best way possible. And so really, it all comes down to relationships, and the more relationships you have tied in, the more people you have to be tied in. That's how you can do it the best way. And we want to be in some of those battles and all the battles that we can to make sure we're getting the right fit and win as many of those as we can as well.
You know, when Mike first got here, we talked about that, relationships. And, you know, Odell and Ron were really the only two guys from Florida. And it felt like it felt to me like it was going to take a few years to really establish. Has that been true?
Yeah, I think you look at it and some of the examples in the past of reasons for that, but you've had a couple years to create those relationships, also to find some footing. But at the end of the day, you know, the individual that you're going after, whoever it is in their life, whether it's the individual, the champion in their life, a parent, aunt, uncle, coach, right? How can you be relatable? How can they see that you're just a regular person just like they are and relate to them in those situations? So yes, Coach X might not necessarily relate to the individual as best, but he might relate to someone else in the family. And so who can you identify that's important in the process to make sure that you're making an impact every single day on that individual's life, and to let them know that this doesn't stop from the moment they sign. This is going to be ongoing for the rest of their life. That support's going to always be there for them.
I want to ask you about some roles. Let's just start with your role.
Yep.
Explain your role to our listeners.
Yeah, so my responsibility, obviously working hand in hand with our coaching staff to make sure we have the best roster assembled every single point of the year, right? And so all facets of that, whether it's in our overall personnel, our scouting, our recruiting, just the oversight of all involved. And I'm lucky enough to do it with some great people that I get to work with on a day-to-day. You know, and so that's broken up into scouting, into personnel, into recruiting operations, into high school relations, into our content team and recruiting, and then working day to day with our coaching staff to making sure we're addressing those needs and where we are, and making sure we're all on the same page, and that Coach and I are constantly having that same communication and we share the same vision to make sure we're moving forward in the correct way.
Seems to me that Mike Norville is extremely involved in recruiting and an organized, energetic guy. How would you?
Yeah, exactly that way. I mean, he's as organized as I've ever been around, and his vision. There's never a moment to where he's not thinking of how can we do something better, right? And so even if it is the standard, going back to his always 1% ways to improve. You know, we want to make sure we're looking at all facets of how can we improve, how can we do it a little bit better, maybe a little more efficient. Are we hitting everything that we need to hit? Are we getting the best players? And looking back and just being okay with asking the reasons why. So if it did work or if it didn't work, how can we do it that much better to become that much more effective?
Now, do you all recruit by region of the country or by position or combination of both?
Yeah, a combination of both. We're primarily area. And so for their area, but also for the position coach with some heavy involvement there. But obviously with this footprint that we have around us, you know, we want to look into that driving radius ideal. And so look in there, but there's also going to be some secondary areas that we want to attack where there's some firm relationships, whether it be Texas, whether it be, you know, the DMV area, whether it be the Carolinas, whether it be maybe once in a while we'll go out to California for a guy. And so where those relationships exist and where those best fits are, we want to make sure we get the best fits for Florida State.
Okay, I want to get a little geeky with you here. So you have a group that scouts. They're looking at film and they're looking at prospects around the country. Your position coaches are out in their market, and so there's data flowing. How does it flow from Mike to his staff as to who becomes a priority on the recruiting list?
Yeah, so the various of two ways, really. It's inductive or deductive reasoning, right? And so typically recruiting, you start with deductive reasoning, right? And you cast that wide net, that funnel, and you try to bring people down and shake it the further and further they work through. right? And to find out what that initial list is that you're going to go after. But also it might be someone who's discovered later in the process, right? And so we want to always be collecting information. And just because maybe necessarily we've offered someone, the evaluation has not stopped. And so that's where I think people, hey, they've been offered. No, the evaluation is still ongoing every time they come on campus, every time they're on a visit, every time we're at a game or see them in person. That evaluation is always ongoing. We're always in the business of collecting information and want to make sure that we're not succumbing to maybe necessarily information overload, but also making sure that we have as much information possible to make the correct decision moving forward. And so as much information that we can get and we can acquire, we want to do that.
And of course, the kids that are visiting you, who have already committed but continue to visit, they're gathering information about you guys as well.
It's a two-way street, right? They're looking for fit for them, and we're looking for fit for us too.
Right.
And I think that's important to do. But even as something as simple as how they may be treating their family members while they're here on the visit, who they're opening doors for, who they're letting in the elevator first, all of that matters. So you start to shape who the person is, not just as a football player, but who they are off the field. And the more and more you can dive into that character, how they're wired, how they carry themselves, all of it matters because it tells a little bit more of the bigger picture.
Okay. So we see offers going out, a lot of offers, and but they're not necessarily kids that will sign with us. We've offered them, maybe they've accepted it, the offer, maybe even verbally committed, but that process continues on until national signing day.
Yeah, always evaluating, right? And there may be something that comes up. There may be pieces of new information. Maybe new film available. Maybe it's something on their transcript. God forbid it's something that they get in trouble legality-wise. But there's always new information out there. So being constantly aware of what is changing in the landscape and just being aware of all, right? And so we can make the best decisions possible for the best fit for Florida State.
And the last question I'm sure people want to know, NIL has become a factor. It was that you all couldn't have any involvement with NIL, but now you can have some, can't you?
I mean, very limited. We can educate on it, but we're not allowed to be involved in any type of inducement. That's not allowed with the NCAA regulations or any of those things. But I think NCAA or the NIL is a piece, and we'll see what the NCAA comes up with obviously trying to restructure some of this information. But happy that we have Battle's End in place to make sure we are competitive in all areas that we need to be.
Okay. Listen, thank you so much for taking time.
Yes, sir.